I'm joined now by Congressman Ted Deutch, Democrat from Florida and a member of the House Foreign Affairs, Judiciary, and Ethics Committees, with plenty to talk about this morning. Congressman, thanks for coming back on the show.
It's great to be with you. Thanks.
Let me start with a little bit on the Democratic race come 2020. Dave Weigel over at the Washington Post reports that Bernie Sanders in the last 3 hours since it launched its campaign raised more than $1 million, right? There is clearly a lane for Bernie Sanders, for progressive Democrats. Which way do you think the party should go come 2020? That more progressive lane or the more moderate one?
Yeah. Well, I don't, at this point, we're just at the start of this campaign. Here's what I can tell you about every single candidate who's running. They want to restore American leadership when Donald Trump retreated. They want to restore American values like integrity and honesty and truth that Donald Trump has trampled. They want to deal with real emergencies like climate change and 40,000 people dying a year from gun violence and economic insecurity of millions of Americans rather than fake national emergencies. So we're going to have a long, important debate about how to do all of these things. But the difference between every single Democrat who's running and a president who has thrown these values out the window is stark. And that's why we're all so optimistic about the 2020 election.
One thing Senator Sanders did not talk about when he was asked was this explosive claim by Andrew McCabe, somebody else who's making headlines today, regarding the 25th Amendment and conversations that were apparently had, according to McCabe, on the level of Rod Rosenstein to remove Donald Trump from office. Sanders said he didn't want to talk about it. I'm wondering if you do, what you make of that claim and what you make of the reaction so far to McCabe.
Well, I absolutely I appreciate the question. Of course, when the acting director faced a moment where there was such concern by him and among his team that they chose to launch a counterintelligence investigation into the President of the United States. There are a million questions that follow from that. We have to look at the president's actions from disclosing highly classified information to the Russian foreign minister in the Oval Office, to the secret meeting with the off the record, without anyone in attendance, meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. We have to ask the questions about what is it exactly that the president has been doing. And to the extent that the acting director can shed some light into what they were thinking at the time, it helps prove why the Mueller investigation is so important. But remember, Hallie, I just make this point. The Mueller investigation is important not because it's going to produce a report. We're interested in seeing him finish his work. But what we're ultimately interested in is getting to the truth for the American people. That is going to come in part from what Mueller produces, and it's going to come in part from what Congress is now underway in investigating.
So given what you just laid out, Congressman, about the idea that Andrew McCabe is talking about some of this and answering some of these questions, do you want him to come back in front of, as a member of the Judiciary Committee, do you want to see him come in front of your committee? What questions would you have for him? Should he be subpoenaed if he doesn't do it voluntarily?
Well, I would like to ask the kinds of questions that I just laid out. The decision to launch a counterintelligence investigation into the president is it's remarkable. It's distressing, and certainly we'd like to understand better what the thinking was, even beyond what was already public at that time. We're at this moment now where the president every day tweets about the Mueller report. The director of national intelligence was just on Capitol Hill. The president continues to try to undermine the intelligence community, makes claims about Russia and this investigation being a hoax, when the director of national intelligence tells us that the intelligence community is so worried about Russia's attempts to interfere with the 2020 election. All of this, there's a whole pattern that's developed over the course of this presidency that needs to be the focus, not just of the Mueller investigation, but I want to hear what the acting director has to say, and just as we listened to the FBI director before him.
You mentioned the DN codes. I have a question for you on that, but very quickly here. Just sure. Yes or no, would you support a subpoena for Andy McCabe if he didn't come on his own accord?
Well, I don't know that a subpoena is going to be necessary. I'd like to ask him to come in, and by all indication, it sounds like he's going to.
On Dan Coates, the director of national intelligence, somebody who interacts with the president, especially when he's down in Florida, Chris Ruddy, said, I think to Christian Amanpour, the president is not happy with Coates for publicly disagreeing on North Korea's nuclear capabilities. There was that moment, I want to show it here very quickly, between Andrea Mitchell and Dan Coates, of course, last year, which seemed to show the disconnect. You remember this, right? Watch.
We have some breaking news. The White House has announced on Twitter that Vladimir Putin is coming to the White House in the fall.
Say that again?
Vladimir Putin coming
Did I
to
hear
the...
you? Did I hear you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to be special.
What happens, Congressman, if the president does, in fact, get rid of Dan Coates?
Right, but remember, Hallie, the president sending out one of his friends to talk about his displeasure doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with the job that the director of national intelligence is doing. The fact that Dan Coates came to Capitol Hill and pointed out that when the president says that he's defeated ISIS, the national intelligence director points out that in fact ISIS has thousands of soldiers who are looking to carry out attacks. The president says that North Korea has no nuclear weapons. He says that they're not giving up their WMD capabilities. And on Russia, we've already talked about that. The president is upset because the intelligence community has just shown time and again that most of what the president says on these issues is just flat out wrong.
Congressman Ted Deutch, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for coming on the show. Much appreciated.